We're going to bring it from 25% to 50%, the tariffs on steel into the United States of America.
All right, let's turn back to the White House and President Trump's decision to raise tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from 25 to 50%.
Canadian steel and aluminum producers say it will have a devastating effect.
The latest tariffs on steel and aluminum are unjustified. They're illegal. They're bad for American workers, bad for American industry, and of course for Canadian industry as well.
The steady rhythm of industry has fallen silent, leaving behind enormous factory halls crowded with motionless machines that once stood as monuments of stability and local pride. The conveyor belts remain in place. The tools are ready for use, yet the workforce is missing. In a matter of days, more than 100,000 jobs were wiped out, not because of robotics or cheaper imports, but because of a single decision at the top. A sweeping 50% tariff on aluminum was unveiled as a daring move to defend American manufacturing and restore strength to struggling towns. Instead, it dismantled the very system it was supposed to protect. Plants were shuttered, families were forced into hardship, and whole regions felt abandoned. Across the border, Canada quietly transformed those same policies into a golden opening. As skepticism spreads, even among the strongest supporters of the tariff, a sobering question looms. Was this only the first domino? And if one measure could cripple an industry so fast, what else could be undone next? The roots of the story stretch back to 2018, when Washington leaned on tariffs as a fix to what was framed as a national weakness. Aluminum, essential to construction, transportation, and defense, was targeted. A 10% duty on imports was rolled out with vows to revive U.S. smelters, restore factory jobs, and ensure independence from foreign supply chains. At the time, the public rallied behind the plan, convinced it would shield workers and rebuild industrial muscle. Yet the duty didn't stay fixed. It crept up to 25%, and by 2025 it was doubled to an astonishing 50%. More surprising than the sheer number was a reach. Not even close allies like Canada were spared, even though its aluminum had long been a vital part of North American supply. From afar, the measure looked like a bold effort to regain control. Inside the sector, though, a far different reality was emerging. Aluminum is not a commodity that can be handled lightly. It lies at the heart of countless industries, from airplanes and cars to towers of glass and steel, but smelting it is among the most energy-intensive processes known. Producing a single ton devours as much electricity as an average household consumes in several months. That truth cannot be escaped. In the U.S., where power costs are anything but cheap, tariffs did nothing to solve the deeper issue. The policy was designed to level competition, but in practice, it left American smelters burdened with expenses that made operations unworkable. Across the Northern Line, the picture told a starkly different story. In Canada, especially in Quebec, smelters had long been powered by abundant hydroelectric energy. Their electricity rates averaged nearly half those faced by U.S. producers, and the reliability of that supply meant planning decades into the future was possible. In Ohio or Kentucky, places where factories once anchored communities, power bills could soar sharply during peak demand. That single difference handed Canada a decisive lead. Even with a 50% shield wrapped around American producers, they could not compete with the reality of low-cost, clean Canadian energy. Industry leaders began to sound the alarm. Alcoa, one of the most recognized names in American aluminum, spoke publicly, insisting that tariffs meant little without tackling energy head-on. Executives explained that no volume of protectionist speeches could bring smelters back online if electricity remained out of reach. What they asked for was not political theater, but a coherent energy plan capable of sustaining plants for generations. Without it, the fight for American aluminum was unwinnable. In Washington, however, the rhetoric did not change. Officials continued to present the tariffs as a safety net for workers. Speeches rang with pledges of industrial renewal, yet on the ground a far bleaker reality was unfolding. Companies that relied on aluminum saw their costs skyrocket. Construction firms, automakers, and manufacturers that depended on the metal all felt the pressure. Some tried to swallow the extra expense by slashing hours, cutting staff, or scaling back output. Others shifted production abroad to escape the squeeze. Instead of reviving employment, the tariffs unleashed a wave of shutdowns that erased tens of thousands more jobs. The impact spilled beyond U.S. borders. Canada, In particular, watched the situation with deliberate patience. Ottawa avoided loud retaliation or dramatic gestures. Instead, it leaned further into its natural advantage, inexpensive hydroelectric power and stable links to global markets. Rather than fuel a trade clash, Canada focused on the long game, and it began to work. Quebec smelters kept running at full tilt, and some expanded, adding new technology and hiring skilled workers. Orders began arriving from Europe and Asia, regions anxious for steady supply amid growing trade turbulence. Where the United States once carried the reputation of a dependable industrial partner, Canada quietly filled the gap. The transition was not sudden or explosive, but it was impossible to ignore. Canadian towns connected to smelting saw growth and opportunity, while American communities endured the opposite. Plants locked their doors, and workers left with boxes holding the remains of careers built over decades. For those places, the dream of industrial revival dissolved into pink slips and unease. The figures reveal the scale of the collapse. More than 100,000 jobs tied to aluminum have vanished since the tariffs were introduced. Nearly 20,000 of those losses came directly from smelting, positions requiring expertise, often concentrated in regions already struggling with decline. Each statistic represents families, mortgages, and communities suddenly thrown into uncertainty. On the Canadian side, the contrast could not be sharper. Quebec produces over 90% of the country's aluminum, and its heavy dependence on hydroelectric energy has provided unmatched stability. The pairing of renewable power and deliberate trade policy created a lasting advantage that no tariff could undo. While American producers contracted, Canadian smelters expanded. Jobs were created, engineers brought on, and investment poured into modernizing technology to improve efficiency and scale. The consequences underlined the widening gap. In the U.S., facilities that were supposed to benefit from protection instead found themselves suffocated by steep electricity costs. Tariffs, intended as a shield, became another obstacle that magnified existing weaknesses. In Canada, companies thrived under conditions built carefully over decades. Their energy policy was not a reaction to tariffs, but a forward-looking strategy crafted to secure resilience. The irony is unavoidable. The very measures designed to revive American industry accelerated Canada's rise. With smelters powered by affordable, renewable energy, Canada not only captured international demand, but also cemented its role as a dependable supplier. Meanwhile, American towns were left behind. Factories locked, assembly lines quiet, and communities carrying the weight of broken promises. In the heart of Quebec's aluminum sector, plants fueled almost entirely by hydropower continue to operate without pause. That one decisive factor became the cornerstone of Canada's global edge. By contrast, U.S. smelters scaled back, hampered by high energy costs and protectionist rules that left them inefficient. Running an aluminum plant without low-cost power is like charging headfirst into a solid wall. Tariffs, no matter how large, cannot change that reality. Which leaves an uneasy question. Is this just the beginning of a much broader economic disruption? In the opening quarter of 2025, as American aluminum plants struggled under the weight of new tariffs, Canada quietly logged a 12% jump in production. That single surge offset much of the deficit Washington's policy had created and positioned Canada far stronger than expected. Before the tariff war went up, Canada already supplied nearly 60% of U.S. aluminum imports. Yet instead of retaliating against the sweeping 50% duty, Ottawa charted another course. There were no threats, no fiery speeches in Parliament, and no hurried reversals. Instead, Canada methodically strengthened global ties, expanded partnerships with Europe and Asia, and doubled down on renewable energy strategies that had long anchored its domestic smelting industry. The approach was understated but deliberate, and the outcome caught many observers off guard. Expectations had been that Canada might stumble under American pressure. Instead, the reverse occurred. Smelters in Quebec and British Columbia not only stayed operational but broadened their output. Skilled workers, engineers, and technicians were hired in significant numbers. New production lines were introduced, and shipments rolled out of Canadian ports bound for destinations that once relied heavily on U.S. supply. Multinational firms that never planned to pivot away from American producers suddenly had little alternative. With tariffs driving costs to unworkable levels, the choice was about survival. A Toronto-based aerospace executive put it bluntly. With tariffs at 50%, buying aluminum from the United States is not feasible. No company can keep operating at a loss. This adjustment unfolded faster than anyone had predicted, and with it, Canada's image as a hub of clean, reliable aluminum production became even stronger. The advantage wasn't only economic but also environmental. Because Canadian smelters relied on hydroelectricity, their aluminum was classified as green in a marketplace increasingly attuned to emissions. The combination of lower costs and sustainability boosted its standing internationally. For Canadians, the shift was not met with loud victory claims but with quiet confidence. There was a sense of pride in seeing their nation withstand global turbulence, hold a position, and build upon decades of investment in renewables and industrial resilience. Which lead to the pressing question: are we watching the rise of an outcome that cannot be reversed, or is there still room to change course before the window closes?